welcome back to a brand new video. My name is Jade Shinyu and I help people reclaim back their power physically, mentally and spiritually. Now today's video is going to be extremely interesting as I'm going to be talking about the return of the Anunnaki, which apparently is supposed to happen this year in 2022. Now I'm going to be reading parts from a book that I found, and a little warning, this video may disturb some people. It may trigger a bit of anxiety because it's quite extreme what the book says. However, it's for the best, I hope. But that being said, I'm not saying that what's said in this book is 100% going to happen. The only reason I've brought this to light and I want to do a video about it is I see a lot of similarities between this events and other events as well about the future, really mainly to do with a timeline split of New Earth, of one people or group of people of a higher vibration experiencing a completely different reality, a completely different dimension to low vibrational people. So the higher group of people will experience a more loving, healthy, cleansed earth, clean, you know, basically just the earth that we want, more peaceful lives, more calm, more order. And then the other group will experience basically the earth dying, a lot of chaos, a lot of darkness, suffering, as that's what they're vibrationally matched to. For those of you who don't know, the Anunnaki are said to be a higher group of alien beings that come from the planet Nibiru. Now in this book and in other sources there was a lot of evidence suggesting that the Anunnaki are actually our creators, that they created the human race many years ago, and they created us in their image. And basically they spliced our DNA, so well our ancestors, early ancestors' DNA with their DNA to create a race of workers to help them on Earth. Now according to this book there's a lot of different theories about the Anunnaki. A lot of people say that they were evil and corrupted and horrible and they enslaved us, that they basically created us as slaves to mine gold, etc. But there's other sources that don't say that they literally were very kind to us, that they wanted to teach us, they wanted us to be like them, to be in their image, and on their planet it's very peaceful, very orderly, basically just quite high vibrational. They hate greed, they don't tolerate lower vibrational behavior, and there's a lot that went on. So of course it's hard to say, there's many different theories and texts, and you know, from the Sumerian times, etc., the 14 tablets. So there's a lot of information, but I'm not going to get into all of that in this video. But in this book it portrays the Anunnaki in a good light. The author, who very impressively wrote 2,500 books in total, portrays the Anunnaki. Basically he says that a lot of people put out wrong information about the Anunnaki, that what was translated, a lot of it was wrong, you know, a lot of it's just bullshit, to be frank, and that they're not what people think. So I'll get into it, and basically what is going to happen, basically their final warning to humanity is what this book is about. So this is the book I read. Obviously it'll be backwards. But it's basically called The Anunnaki's Final Warning to Earth and Their Return in 2022. So this book is basically is warning people what's going to happen. And the first half is basically a story. So basically it's a woman who is Anunnaki, basically an Anunnaki hybrid, because there are many hybrids on Earth of many different alien races. But she was brought up on Earth, and then she moved to Nibiru, and then she came back to Earth and vice versa. And basically she met up with this guy and she wanted to tell her story, and she wanted to tell what's going to happen and to warn humans basically what's to come in the future. So she said that an event called, you know, the cleansing is going to happen on Earth in 2022, around the 30th of November or the 1st of December. This is going to be kind of like the apocalypse. Basically, a lot of people will die. A lot of people will need to be cleansed off, away from the earth. Because basically the Anunnaki created us to be pure. They didn't want us to turn out how we turned out. And there's a reason why. There's some people who have a lot of empathy, a lot of love, a lot of, you know, qualities and traits that the Anunnaki have, apparently, you know, all higher vibrational traits, higher consciousness, that sort of thing. And there's obviously lower vibrational people who have a lot of negative traits that the Anunnaki don't have, that they didn't want humans to have. So, you know, cruelty, evil, you know, basically people who harm others, narcissism, etc. So this is what the Anunnaki want to cleanse off Earth, because this is not what it was supposed to be like, apparently, according to them in this book. So what went wrong is basically they created us on Earth separate from their planet. So they wanted to create a race in their image, a group of scientists, and basically it got leaked to another group of alien beings who are malevolent, who are not high vibrational. And those are known as the Greys, so the Grey aliens. So basically the Anunnaki despise the Grey aliens. They really, really do not like them. And basically the Greys are a dying race. So they have a lot of health problems, they can't reproduce. And this is the reason why they do a hell of a lot of experiments now and currently, and have been for many years, on humans. Because they're trying to cure themselves. They have a disease, I can't remember the name, but basically it's in their genes and they can't get it out. They can't reproduce, they're really suffering, they're quite ill. So they've been doing these experiments for a very long time, since the 1940s, 50s. Humans were known to these experiments, the military first, and then the presidents. So all of the Greys bases, because they have underground bases on land, in water, are mainly in America, and Antarctica as well. So the Greys are not nice, obviously. They're very cold, they're quite selfish, and they create hybrids also. So basically, I'm not going to go into all of that now. That's a whole other video. So I'll have to do another separate video on that, because there's a lot of information to say. But basically, to get to the point, the Anunnaki don't like what the Greys are doing to humans and what they have been doing. And unfortunately, the Greys have contaminated our DNA. So this is why people who are more negative have higher levels of grey DNA contamination. So there are different levels. So it's heavy contamination, medium contamination, and light contamination. And then there's some humans who don't have any contamination of the negative energy from the Greys on Earth. So basically the Anunnaki left us thousands of years ago because they saw that the humans got contaminated. They started to turn violent, greedy, jealous, etc. They started harming each other. They were too sexual as well. So this is what they couldn't deal with anymore, basically, and they left. So they have not been involved on Earth. They've just left us to it. However, they have kept some connection to us, to keep an eye on us and to see what happens, as they didn't want to completely just break that connection altogether. So they have what's called the conduit, which I think is basically communication to our third eye. So if you have it open, you're able to get guidance and like connect to them. Because obviously we all have a bit of Anunnaki DNA within us. So we'll always have a connection to them. And basically, they have had enough and they want to do what's called the cleansing. And I'm going to read from this book exactly what that is. And basically with this book, half of it is the story written in first person of the Anunnaki hybrids woman. And she goes and says a lot about quite a few things about her interactions with the military, her interactions with grey aliens working for the military, because the military made a contract with the Greys to experiment on us and many other things. But like I said, I'll have to do a whole separate video on that, as there's a lot. But basically, she was trying to warn the military that the Greys lie, they can't be trusted, and they should abandon and break all contracts with the Greys and basically take the side of the Anunnaki. But it's humans being stupid, they didn't do that. because basically they got weaponry and advanced technology from the Greys. That's what they got in exchange for selling us humans to be experimented on. Also, they do breeding programs as well, and that's a whole other video that I myself have had personal experiences with. But yes, I won't get into that right now. So let me try and find. So yeah, basically, so the woman is called Sina Anbar Anati, an Anunnaki hybrid woman born on Earth of Anunnaki lineage, who married an Anunnaki Sina, travelled to Nibiru, lived there for several years, and studies the true history of humanity here on Earth, as well as learning much about life on Nibiru. And according to her, she said that the Anunnaki will be returning in 2022. And the decision has been made and is now irrevocable and final. So another thing to point out is some people think that it might not actually happen this year in 2022 because they changed our calendar back in 1850 something or 40 something. I'm not 100% sure on that. But basically a pope, can't remember his name, changed our calendar. So we are actually 8 years ahead of actual time. So that's a bit weird as well. But basically the real 2022 will actually be 2030. So that's another thing to point out. And it's really interesting because some other countries like Ethiopia are still living on the old calendar. So there at the moment is actually 2014. And their 2012 was our 2020, which goes hand in hand with the Mayan predictions of the end of the world, you know, as we knew it, being in 2012. So that makes a hell of a lot more sense in regards to what happened in 2020 and all that madness. So it may not be this year, it may actually be in 2030. So that's another thing to make note of. So this is the events that apparently will happen in the end of this year or 2030. So let's get to it. So it's important to know that she said that the Anunnaki have done this several times to other races and other experiments. So it's nothing new to them. So what they call it is the Anunnaki's bubble. So basically it's going to be a bubble-like thing, substance that comes to Earth. And she says that, you know, with humans, we can't imagine it because it's so advanced, the technology. It's very difficult for our brains to, like, you know, wrap around it. So basically it says here, we'll bring a bubble of a special substance resembling antimatter. Remember I said what antimatter? But it is not destructive, and cause it to touch the Earth's atmosphere. The bubble will be exactly the same size of planet Earth. As soon as the two globes touch, all the humans that have been lucky enough to not be contaminated by the Greys' DNA, and all the animals, plants, and those inanimate materials that the Anunnaki wish to preserve, such as beautiful and historic monuments, art-filled museums, libraries, in addition to the homes of those saved, will be stripped from the Earth and absorbed into the bubble. So that's interesting. But nothing will be hurt or damaged. The humans and animals will feel nothing. They will be secure and comfortable within the bubble. It is unlikely they will even retain a clear memory of the events, because we would not wish them to be traumatized. Yeah, because I imagine that'll be very traumatizing being sucked into a bubble. But basically this is quite interesting because it goes hand in hand with what Dolores Cannon said a lot. So those of you who don't know Dolores Cannon, she basically hypnotized and done thousands of past life regressions on people. So she spoke about New Earth and how the Earth was going to split into two timelines. So obviously one being negative and one being positive, so the negative one, there will be obviously a lot of death, destruction, like I said earlier. And then the positive one, the new Earth, will be the higher vibrational Earth that gets saved, basically. The negative one, everything will die and perish. So it's kind of similar to that. And she said that when that happens, we won't remember it. It will basically be you shifting to a different dimension, to a different reality. So you won't even be aware, possibly, that it even did happen. but the timeline you'll be on will be really positive, and things will naturally just heal and fall into place. So it kind of reminds me of that, but with this, it's like sort of like that, but at the same time not. It was even more sort of physical. But anyway, let's move on. So yes, she goes on to say, then the earth will be cleansed of all pollution. For lack of a better description, try to imagine a huge vacuum cleaner removing all the landfills, eliminating all plastics, all the dirt, all the smog from the air, and all the filth from the ocean. In a short few minutes, the earth will be sparkling clean, a pristine planet, the way it was when we had first created it. Disposing of the garbage involves very high technology which humans simply do not yet understand. The beautiful clean planet will be ready to be repopulated, and in an instant the humans, animals, plants and inanimate objects that were saved in the bubble would be returned to Earth. So basically they want to make Earth in, again, their own image. So they want Earth to be like Nibiru, because in this book later on it says how Nibiru is very clean, it's very orderly, there's no governments, there's no money, there's no prisons, there's no, basically nothing like that exists, because everyone has such a high level of consciousness and love and wisdom and maturity. Nothing like that exists. So people just do what they want, essentially. People have jobs and stuff still, and they create, but they live a life that is actually fulfilling. They live a life that isn't just for money, you know. So there's nothing like that exists on Nibiru, and that's what they want us Earth to be, and that's what the point of this whole thing is going to be. But obviously to create that, a hell of a lot of cleaning and purging will need to be done. And it goes on to say that after that there will be Anunnaki guides for the humans afterwards that will stay on Earth. So the guides will be there for the humans who will naturally need a bit of help to adjust to the new life. But then but those are only the uncontaminated ones, someone asked. But what about the others? How will they meet their fate? So how will the people who have high contaminated DNA, negative energy, what will happen to them? And then after I've read this, I will actually do, because there's actually a list of like what traits people have that have heavy contamination, medium and light. So you can compare yourself to them traits. And if you find that you have one of those traits, then now is probably the time to, you know, change that or work on that. Again, I'm not saying this is 100% going to happen. Like, I really hope it does, and that can sound really like fucked up, but in my opinion, I think many empaths will relate to me when I say that, like, you know, we've had enough. Like, we've had such a huge amount of suffering, and we just don't want the evil energy to be rampant on Earth anymore, because there's come a time now where it's just getting insane and the amount of suffering and pain and evil and torture is just extreme now on Earth, and something needs to be done. So I hope and pray that this does happen to save the animals, the planet, to save people who have love and purity, you know, in their hearts. Because it just ends all that misery, all that pain, all that harm. Anyway, so let's continue. So she said, those who are heavily contaminated and who are engaged in cruelty, greed and violence for their own gain will have no chance at all. They will simply be destroyed, and there is no need to even think about them any further. What is left are those who are of medium level contamination and the lighter level. So these groups will receive a warning to mend their lives, and basically before the event of 2022. When the event occurs, some of the people of light level contamination will have completely cleansed themselves through their efforts, and therefore would have been transferred as clean beings into the bubble. Others would have remained lightly contaminated. So those of medium level contamination who require more work would be divided into those who had succeeded in the cleansing and had brought themselves into a light level contamination. So those who remain at medium level, who did not do the work, cleansing themselves properly, so raising their vibration, you know, being a good person basically, will be destroyed with the heavily contaminated ones. So basically that means that people in the lists of high contamination, so heavy contamination and medium contamination, will be killed. Like, they're going to be deleted basically. So sorry to say that, but there's a reason. So all of that will remain now, will be the group of a light contamination level people. And if they wish to save themselves, they must go through stargates, which they called bahubs, into other dimensions so they could be evaluated by the Anunnaki. If they can be cleansed, they can then go back to Earth. So the people with light contamination, who are like, you know, a little bit sort of negative, they'll have an opportunity. So when this event happens, they said that all these stargates are going to open around the Earth, because portals and stargates are everywhere, according to them. There could be like one right next to me right now. There could be one in your house, in the street, in the bush. Like, they are everywhere. However, they're very terrifying to go through, because it explains here what they're like to actually travel through. And they say the experience is extremely frightening and traumatic, to say the least. But yeah, so they exist everywhere. They are huge, magnificent bahubs that are used regularly by the Anunnaki to cross from one dimension to another. So this is how they travel, basically. But there are also small ones located in the street, in a tree, in an apartment building, in private homes, you name it. They will become visible when the bubble touches with the earth. And those who are not taken into the bubble or were not destroyed must find their way into a stargate. All stargates look the same. They are a circle of shifting light of rainbow colours, very clearly defined. People wishing to enter a bahub, stargate, must hurl themselves against it, and it will open and absorb any number of travellers. As soon as you enter the stargate, you are going already into another dimension. So, but it is extremely frightening. I'll explain what it's like right now, what it says. Basically, it's a deep blackness illuminated by explosions, thunderbolts, and streaking comets. There is a very high level of a stormy whoosh-like sound. The noise can be deafening, and the traveller is swept with violent speed forwards, unable to resist or help the move, and constantly twirled and twisted in one direction and then another. Well, that sounds nice. The traveller will feel dizzy, disorientated and scared. Well, no shit. And this lasts for an indefinite period of time. How long exactly? When this part is over, the traveller is thrown by a huge gust of wind into a tunnel which is so brightly lit by blinding orange, yellow and white lights that it is impossible to keep one's eyes open for more than a few seconds at a time. The traveller hears horrible shrieks, screams and howling of wind, and then when the eyes are open. He or she will then see bizarre faces, weird creatures and unknown vehicles which always seem almost on the verge of colliding with the traveller, but somehow never do. I swear I've had dreams like this. Like, let me know in the comments if this sounds familiar. Like, I've experienced some really scary shit that sounds similar to this, so I don't know. But let me know if this relates. Anyway, after a while, the traveller is thrown out of the tunnel onto solid ground, which may be quite painful, but not permanently harmful. The light becomes normal and the sound stops. And then at that point, you have now arrived in a different dimension. It kind of reminds me of that film, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, which I saw recently, which I was going to do a video on. And that's all about the multiverse and you being able to like travel into different dimensions and that sort of thing. But that's what it kind of reminds me of. But basically, yeah, so that's what it's like to go through a stargate. And this is what people who have light contamination will have to do. But let's go on to say what they'll have to do. So from then on, oh, and this is interesting about the whole vegan vegetarian diet thing. So basically the Anunnaki hate eating meat. They are all strict vegetarians, sort of vegan as well. So basically the only times they will have milk or eggs is or like approve of it if it's humane. So if it's literally like your own chicken or your own cow and it is lived a completely lovely life. I mean, I still would never drink dairy or eggs or anything. I don't think eggs are too bad if you have your own chickens, like backyard hens. I think that's cool, as long as you really love and look after them. But yeah, they're basically very, very strict on the whole no eating meat rule, because it just doesn't happen in the Buru. They're very strict vegetarians. They don't have any junk food as well. So basically, they say, yeah, so from then on, so once the travellers have arrived in that dimension, the travellers will eat only a vegetarian diet. In this dimension, the travellers will meet a few Anunnaki who will direct them to their evaluation and possible cleansing. Only those who make it will then be returned to Earth. Those who cannot be cleansed will be sent through a stargate to the dimension we have mentioned before, where they will live out their lives, but not be able to reproduce. And isn't that interesting? Because what are we heading to in humanity? What is the you-know-what being linked to? Infertility. So already infertility is becoming a massive problem, and especially with those who have had the you-know-what. So it goes on to say that the Anunnaki do not wish to kill these people, so the people with light contamination that don't quite, cleanse themselves. So since they are not inherently evil like the heavily contaminated ones, but we cannot let them reproduce the bad DNA. The Anunnaki do not wish to indulge in sentimental pity and are fully aware that any form of evil should not be allowed to exist. So this is probably why the Anunnaki might get a bit of a bad rep. And I think it's just because they are very strict in their way of living, and they basically do what needs to be done. And they have a very strong moral sense of justice and injustice, as you'll see in a bit when I read what they permit and what they do not permit. Because basically they do not want evil to exist. And I think we can all relate to that. So now I'm going to read the traits, the bullet points of what they basically see and label heavily contaminated people. So with really bad DNA, bad energy, medium and light. So remember, the ones who are heavy and medium will be just killed, destroyed, no question about it. So let's go on. Oh yeah, and I can't remember where it is in the book, but they said the way that they will die is on Earth, they will then release like a goo, like a black-like glue, goo substance will be released on Earth, and it will completely just kill anything that it comes into contact with. And it's really interesting because I remember seeing the film Prometheus, which is basically about, very similar to the Anunnaki. And in that film, they were literally going to release, if you remember, that black goo that was going to kill all of humanity. So there was a lot of truth in that film, and it's really linked to this book. Like, there's a lot of similarities. The first group, so heavy contaminated ones. So I'm just going to read. There's like loads of bullet points there. So it's going to be those who torture or support torture by others for any purpose whatsoever. Murderers, unless in self-defense, which sometimes occurs in situations such as domestic abuse by a contaminated spouse. Fair enough. Rapists, child molesters, child abusers, senior citizen abusers. I'm probably not going to be able to monetize this video because of all these words, but never mind. Spouse abusers, those who commit violent robberies, illicit drug manufacturers, and anyone who sells drugs, those who engage in enslaving women, girls, and young boys in prostitution rings, the elite, criminals who use their form of religion as an excuse for their crimes. This includes all religious extremists, such as suicide bombers, those who destroy lives by depriving them of ways to support themselves for their own greed. This includes anyone in business who has lost any sense of humanity in their treatment of thousands of people and feel that this is strictly business. That's a lot of people. Elected officials who have sold out for power and greed and who are willing to destroy their own countries to aggrandize themselves to probably get more power, more money. Elected officials who are willingly participating in destroying the ecology of the planet because of their close association with oil corporations and other forms of commercial energy, producing countries and their corrupt rulers. any politician, military personnel, or anyone else who is engaging in the trade with the Greys, allowing them to continue their atrocities in exchange for technical and military knowledge. That's a lot. Lawyers and judges who play games at the legal system for their own gain, sending child molesters, murderers, and other violent offenders back into society, ready to prey again on the innocent. Those who destroy lives and reputations by identity thefts. Those who torment animals. These include not only people who hunt and mutilate animals for their own sick pleasure, but also those who support dogfights, cockfights, bullfights, those who beat their horses, donkeys, or dogs, those who legally mutilate cats by removing their claws or hurting their vocal cords, etc. Owners of puppy mills who force female dogs to reproduce by animal rape, and those who abandon their animals or chain them indefinitely, sometimes allowing them to die by such neglects. And also prostitutes. So anyone who is a sex worker. So that's very interesting. So I remember in my video I said basically, you know, exposing OnlyFans, that you get really bad karma when you are a sex worker. And this is why I distanced myself from doing that, because it was a huge spiritual downloads that I had, that basically women who pray, because it's basically a woman taking advantage of a man. It's kind of like you giving loads of candy to a child. They're always going to accept junk foods, even drugs, like whatever they feel is pleasurable. It's like you're abusing that child, but you're giving them pleasure at the same time. That's kind of like what these women are like with sex work. So bear that in mind, like, because with men, it takes a lot of their energy away, and it's kind of, it literally gives them brain damage, like porn, sex work, and that sort of thing. So it's a very dark energy. You're basically being a succubus in the flesh. There's nothing to be proud of. So this is the second group, so the medium contaminated people. And this is people who believe that discipline requires physical punishment in children or adults. Business people who only take orders from their superiors at their corporations, who are destroying the economy of their own countries to save their own skin. Those in the name of fashion and beauty who have hurt countless young girls, who have succumbed to eating disorders, some whom have actually died, while the owners make a fortune for themselves. Well, that's a lot of companies. Irresponsible parents who allow their children to grow up with the Greys values rather than human and Anunnaki values. Hunters of animals who kill only for food but do not feel a joy in killing and do not mutilate or torment the animals. Owners of factory farms whose animals are not deliberately tormented but live a miserable life. People who eat any form of meat, since we believe in a strict vegetarian diet supplemented by milk and eggs from animals that are treated humanely and are allowed to live out their lives comfortably and die naturally. But anyway, the third group, so these are people with light contamination of grey DNA. So these are the people that will be granted access to stargates to go through and have a chance of redemption, of cleaning themselves. But if they don't, then they'll be sent to a negative timeline where they won't be able to reproduce anymore. So light contamination. So these are people who are willing to advertise products that may be harmful for their own gain. People who are willing to import products that may be harmful for their own gain. People who object to social reform that may help the greater number of others, such as healthcare or better equalization of income for gain. People who are engaged in the fur trade, don't wear fur. People who are willing to influence others through brainwash style advertising, such as the cosmetic industry for gain, and also immoral influencers, take note. Racists, sexists, and ageists who are willing to allow their prejudice to influence their behavior to others. People who are willing to spend millions of dollars on frivolous pursuits, such as diamond-studded collars for dogs, who really don't care about anything but love and food. or £2,000 cakes for a party. Sorry, 200 grand cakes for a party, while millions around them are starving. So basically people who just think about them, even when they have money, who basically don't think about others. And again, I've mentioned this in the past, especially with so-called spiritual influencers who clearly are like millionaires and have so much money, but who never give a shit about, you know, charities or people, you know, who are homeless, or, you know, who don't do any charity work. They basically are just like, oh, you just live in abundance, and they just spend an absolute fortune only on themselves and like stupid fast cars and whatever. So those sort of people, people who actively engage in aggressive corporate takeovers, thus destroying the livelihoods of many. And anyone deliberately sending computer viruses for fun and games, and thus destroying other people's livelihoods and property. It's a bit of a random one, but yeah, I guess that's a pretty shit thing to do. So that is, yeah, the list of the heavy, medium and light contaminated people. So if you had none of those traits, you will be saved. You won't have to go through death or the stargates. So that's basically what it means. Again, I mean, if you want to buy this book, I found it on Amazon. It was quite pricey because they're quite rare. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I will be doing a second video on probably more about the greys. If you want to see that, then let me know in the comments below. And like I said, take this with a pinch of salt. I mean, I try to live as moral and high vibrational as possible, like I always promote on all my other videos, because I believe it is the only way to heal, and it's the only way to basically, yeah, escape the matrix entirely. So could it happen? Maybe. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. So either the end of this year or 2030. I do offer services, so if you want one-to-one special guidance, I offer oracle card readings. So as always, I link that in the description box down below. So please like and subscribe and click the notification bell for future uploads, and let me know what future videos you would like to see as well. So lots of love to you, lots of light. Ahimsa.